Now, I don't know much about the procedure in the Senedd and what you can do or what you can't do. So, are you currently working on any motion brought towards the Senedd? I saw Luke Fletcher the other day stood up and talked about the free to school transport and
Hmm.
that. Are you planning on bringing anything forward?
So, so it's a really good question, actually. So yes, but I can't tell you, and I apologize.
Oh, that's very good.
For the pure reason, I'm still trying to work with. But in a nutshell, I think the Senedd, more than Westminster, to give Senedd the credit it's due, is a place. There's only 60 of us, 650 MPs, and so what that builds is MSs that work together to,
Yeah,
as you say, bring forward legislation or work on specific issues. Um, and from my perspective, with what I'm trying to work on, I'm just trying to thrash things out with other parties at the moment. So it wouldn't be right for me to tell you that. But what I would say is it's very difficult at the moment. Obviously, I'm a Conservative member. As I said to you, I've been a Conservative member for a long, long time. Labour have 30 seats out of the 60 in the Senedd. So they don't
yeah,
have to listen. They can do what they like, you know? So what that leaves me in the position of doing is to try and enact some change, try and work with them rather than against them, um, scrutinize a lot of the decisions they're making, and where they get it right, I will happily tell them they've got it right. But where they've got it wrong, I
yeah,
think it's my job to tell them that they're doing it wrong. Um, and really trying to embarrass them on the occasions where they are getting wrong with the hopes of them changing their minds. So that's the kind of role that I've got in the Senedd, and the other role that I wear in the Senedd as well as the shadow minister for culture, tourism, and sport. So what it means is anytime there's a bit of legislation come forward from the Welsh government in any of those areas, it's usually me leading the charge to read through the minutiae of the detail of whatever's being proposed, and try and work on ways to make it better and hold the government to account on it. So that is the role of an opposition member in the Senedd in a nutshell. It's to try and get done what you can, but be realistic about what can be done. Just based on the pure maths of it.
yeah. So you're the person I would need to speak to with help with in regards to getting this Youth Olympics up in Bridgend that I'm trying to do for 2023 the summer. It's I've got my own problems at the moment, so it's slightly on the back burner. But being the shadow uh, minister for
Yeah.
sport as well, it'll be something to bring to you.
Yeah, so definitely something I
Uh,
want to talk about after this.
I
Yeah,
did speak to Hugh Anker Davis when I originally had the idea back in 2016. He actually invited me to his office. We sat down and we spoke. He said, it sounds a really fantastic idea. We need to, because it was a Wales Olympics at that point, Youth
yeah, yeah.
Olympics. And he said, we need to do it on a smaller scale. And I said, okay, then he said, I'll go away, speak to people that I need to, the sports council and things like that. And that's the last I ever heard of him. That's the last I
Right,
ever got. And
right.
that was one of the reasons why I stood as well. But
Yeah,
because I think he could have come back and said, "Look, it's not going to happen now. We really simply can't do it. You can do what you
yeah,
want to
and,
do,
and you would understand that. Yeah,
and I can understand that. But just then
yeah.
ignoring emails and that is one thing. Anyway, we're going to go on to residents' questions now. Um, I'm not going to do hard, horrible questions at councillors and Senate members now. When it's coming up to election, yes, I'll grill you, I'll put you in front, and I'll challenge you on your things. But this is from a resident. Well, it's
Yeah,
from more than one resident, so I felt this had to be put in. And
yeah, of course.
it's in regards to the motion that Councillor Penhale Thomas brought up last week in regards to the free school meal provision in from universal credit and the means testing on that and the £20 uplift. You and the rest of the Conservatives voted against it. I'll read the question as it was put to
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
So,
cool.
recently you voted against a motion in the council chamber that called for the UK government to not cancel the £20 uplift in universal credit. Could you explain the reasoning for this?
Yeah. So, as you say, the motion came to council. basically asking to reinstate the £20 uplift. So it's important to remember why that £20 uplift came into being in the
Yeah.
first place. It was in March 2020, and it was because of the financial disruption basically that people would suffer as a result of the pandemic. It was always intended to be a temporary increase,
Yeah.
and hopefully, touch wood, as we're coming out of the pandemic, thankfully, there are other schemes like furlough ending, for example, if the furlough is ending today.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Obviously, this is one of the measures that is coming to an end as COVID comes to an end. Now, obviously, if there are future waves and pandemics and things like that, things like furlough and universal credit may have to come back into the fold. But the purpose of it was to sort of cover that financial hardship, and thankfully that is coming to an end. The only thing I would say, sort of in addition to that, is that the responsibility, I guess, of a government is to ensure that there are good work for people that is
Yeah.
well paid. Okay, and I'm sure that 99% of claimants of universal credit who are unemployed would rather be in work.
Yeah. I'm
And yeah, absolutely. And thankfully, we've seen, across a whole range of industries at the moment, there's quite a lot of work out there at the moment, which is a really good and welcome thing. So the government's started a plan for jobs, kickstart scheme to help people back into work, and a whole range of other measures, particularly as furlough is now coming to an end as well. And obviously there'll be people who don't, come back into work at the end of furlough, hopefully to fill those vacancies that already exist. And I think that by calling for the £20 uplift on universal credit to be reinstated would have been sort of fiscally irresponsible, because I read that it would cost about £6 billion to keep that going even for another year, which would be about another penny on people's income tax every year. So it would have been really irresponsible to do that. I think the easiest thing in the world for politicians to do of any stripe is to say, yes, we should fund this and we should fund that and we should do this and we should do that. But unless you've got a plan as to how you're going to pay for it, the words you use are worthless. And unfortunately, I like Ross. I've got on with Ross for a number of years, but like his motion did not have no plan to pay for things he was calling for.
So, as you focus, the question focused on the £20 uplift, but the meat of the motion was the free school meal provision. Did you have any problem with that part of the motion?
You'll have to, from the top of my head, no. You'll have to remind me of the rest of the motion, but no. It was my opposition to it was based around that £20 thing. I think if that hadn't been in there, I can't say I would have had a problem with supporting it, in all honesty.
It was to increase the amount of, because there is a set limit for somebody on universal credit. I think it's about 7,000 something, so that their children can receive a free school meal. Ross was, because this is a Welsh Assembly government issue, was trying to look at getting the Welsh Assembly government to look at that and maybe increase it, especially in these harder times for people with electricity now going up, gas and electricity and energy bills, and it's not just a slight 1 or 2% rise, it's going up fairly substantially. And people like myself on universal credit, okay, my son doesn't actually live with me, so that's fine. My ex-wife does have a fairly decent job and he doesn't get free school meals, he buys his meals. But if my son was living with me, I would be entitled to that free school meal because I am on universal credit, yeah. But there are people out there who are just over that limit, just slightly over that 7,100 and something limit. And it's because they've taken a part-time job and they've earned just that slightly too much, and it's gone away completely. I think it should be a grading system, like you do with some mean tested, where it's, if you get this much, then you get this, and if you get this much, you get this. Whereas this is just a certain cut-off, and I think if you only have to work 12, 15 hours part-time, which isn't a lot, and a lot of people do that to work around so they've got something during the day while the kids in school, and it cuts them off completely from that free school meal. But
And I think, God, sorry,
no, I was
sorry.
going to say, now that motion came in, it was in the free school meal part and the £20
Yeah,
uplift. It was a motion with the £20 uplift was a little bit at the bottom, and I
yeah.
think that was done very well. Couldn't you have then put a motion in yourself saying, I'm happy to vote for the motion on part A, which would be the free school meal part, but I want to vote against the £20 uplift? That is a possibility in the chamber, so why wasn't that
Yeah.
considered at the time?
No, I think that is a fair question. I think that's more to do with the politics of the chamber
Yeah,
than the intention. So you're absolutely right. That could have happened, but I think the reality of the kind of political balance of that chamber meant that even if I or someone else had proposed that amendment, it wouldn't have passed. In all honesty, and then that would have failed, and we'd been back to voting on the previous, the unamended initial motion anyway. But I think the point you made, going back to about that kind of sliding scale, if you like,
yeah,
of entitlement, I think that's a really fair one. And I think that is why universal credit was introduced in the first
yeah.
place. Because if you remember the old system, I think a lot of people were afraid to take on work because,
They'd
oh, if
lose
I
their
take on
benefits
work, I'd lose
completely.
my benefits completely. Absolutely. And that was the wrong approach to encourage people to get back to work. And that's why you had these kind of long-term unemployed people. I remember working for my sins. I used to work at Domino's Pizza in Swansea, and the delivery drivers that were earning, a set amount, and physically said, "Look, I just cannot take on extra hours because if I do, I'll lose entitlement to
Yeah,
this, that, and the other." That's not a sustainable system. Like that shouldn't be the way that system works. As you say, thankfully, I think I don't necessarily think it was rolled out in the best way 5 years ago, whatever it was. But I think the new system was a lot better now, and really incentivizes people to work without losing all of their benefits all at once.
yeah. It's not a perfect system, but then again, no
So,
system is. But it's a better system than what was there. That I think before you could work part time up to a certain amount before
yeah,
you lost your benefits completely.
yeah,
Now it works. It takes so much out of your benefits as you creep up and up, and that encourages people, especially young parents. I'm not just going to include mothers in this, but young parents, single parents who want, now their kids are back in school, they still have that limited time that they need to be there at the start and can only work part time. And I think you worked 16 hours part time before, and that was it. Your benefits gone completely.
yeah.
And you couldn't live off 16 hours back then. You still
No,
can't live off 16 hours now. Even if we up to £15 an hour, you can't live off that. Because, yes, it'd be great to have £15 an hour, but people don't realise that, yeah, business is going to have to put up the cost of everything they sell because they're having to pay more in wages. So £15 an hour may become a living wage, but okay, you lose that because you're paying more in the shops,
it soon
sort of thing.
wouldn't. Yeah, you're right.
It's got to be a sensible way of doing it that it's not going to impact people too much.
And it's like I said earlier, and it applies to tax and government, but it also applies to businesses. We
Yeah,
can all say, we want this funded or people should be paid that much. And I'm sympathetic to those arguments, don't get me wrong, but there's a financial reality behind all of it. You're either going to raise taxes or increase prices by doing that
yeah,
too excessively.
yeah. So there was that motion. I think if the Conservatives had tried to bring in that motion, say we want to vote for the first part, but we want to vote against the second part, at least that would have shown that the Conservatives did have support for the first part, but they couldn't support the second part. That's why. And I think sometimes it's perceptions, and I think
Yeah.
the
And I
way
think that's the
way it's
politics of the system, but I agree. Yeah.
the way it's perceived, because it's like as an independent, I like councillors. I think all councillors, and as I said before, I admired John Spansvik for what he did with Save the Fields, because he stood up to what was a plan, essentially by the Labour-led council, to build a school on the field, and he stood up against that. And I've got to respect any council who does that part of the party, because we know quite often that parties are told a whip to vote a certain way, and I think any councillor who puts their community first before a party should always be and there are a lot of councillors that do that. David and Janice Lewis did it with on the housing development, and good on them. You see that, but if you'd introduced that amendment, even if it did fail, it would show you had sympathy for the one part, but had a reality on the other part. And I think because all four Conservative councillors at the time voted against it, it seemed that you were unfeeling to all of it. When you've just explained you weren't unfeeling to all of it, and you've probably gone about it slightly the wrong way.
Can I just very quickly pick you up on something you said there in passing?
Oh.
And sorry.
No, I had to adjust my shoulder.
Because it's something I've seen a lot on social media. You mentioned it there in passing. I just really want to use this opportunity to set the record straight. And it's where you said about party groups being whipped for what to do. So I was the leader of the Conservative group for nearly 4 years. I never whipped a member of my group to vote a certain way ever. Since Matthew Voicey, who's now the leader of the Conservative group on the council, has done it for the last couple of months, he has never done that either. So I see it a lot, and unfortunately I see it from your gang, the Bridgend County Independents on Facebook, about this kind of whipping system and we're the only ones that stand up for the interests of our communities. That is not true. Like there is, I can't speak for the Labour Party. I've never been a member of the party, thankfully, but I can only speak for my own party. We have never, ever, ever had a whipped vote in Bridgend County Borough Council, and thankfully it's worked pretty well. We've always been able to stand up for our communities while we're doing it.
It's right, and I said I respect him. Does that, John Spans, what you did with Save the Fields and that, and I will respect councillors who do that, but you can see the perception from the ordinary people, not people just like me who listen to politics and look at politics, but the ordinary people where they see groups voting en masse for something that is really unpopular, like the council tax rise, and I did this in my video earlier. I can't believe that not one Labour councillor sat there during the vote and thought, well, this is wrong. People are in hardship at the moment, and okay, they may have not been given the correct details as the auditor pointed out on how much they did actually have in reserves, but they could have looked and thought, don't think that there was one councillor there who sat and thought, my constituents could do with a bit of a break here, let's not vote for a tax rise. But you saw every Labour councillor voting en masse, and then that's where the perception comes from that parties are whipped into vote a certain way when you look at it, and especially something unpopular as the tax rise was this year. Labour Party was the only party that actually voted for the tax rise, and because they had a majority, they actually put it through because too many people abstained on the vote. But that's the way it is, and